Have you covered that story yet, Ryan?
No, I did. I should probably get on that.
Get on
Is
it.
too
Get
late?
on it. Yeah, get on it.
Have I already missed the bus on that story?
Let's just say that video is moving. It will move you.
Yeah.
And believe me, the cheese was moving, too. It was...
Oh.
I'm not even sure where to go with that.
Yeah. Well, it's a real step down after talking to Governor Scott, isn't it?
Yeah, I know.
Well, I mean, I put you in the same category as I do with prominent governors and
Thank you.
public officials. And
Thank you very much.
Did you tell Mr. Scott you had to run short because you had our interview to get to?
Got to cut you short.
Yes, I did.
All right.
I stick this to 10 minutes. I got to do
right.
Utica Radio.
All right. Listen to me. Tell me, what do you, is this hearing going to go off on Monday?
Boy, I think it's 50-50.
Yeah.
I think right now the Republicans have got are trying to weigh the political consequences of this. What seems pretty clear is that there's no way that the accuser, Dr. Ford, is going to testify. And that puts them in a very difficult position because what they're going to do is they're going to say, we gave you, this is their calculus, right? We've given you an opportunity to tell your story, either tell it or don't tell it. But if you don't tell it, we're going to give Judge Kavanaugh one more opportunity to give us his side of the story.
Yeah.
And then we're going to vote. And so then they run the calculated political risk of not hearing this woman out in totality, and then whether or not there's political consequences to that. And I think one of the reasons that they decided to hold off and do the hearing on Monday as opposed to doing it on Friday or Wednesday was because they wanted time to kind of see this through to kind of weigh all the political consequences. You know, there's two things at play here. Is the president willing to take this as far as he can, and is Mitch McConnell willing to take it as far as he can? And then where are these kind of flaky senators, and I use that analogy on purpose, you know, Jeff Flake from Arizona is one of them, Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski. It really comes down to those three. If those three say, it doesn't really matter about the Judiciary Committee, which Flake sits on, because, you know, you need the votes of the entire Senate.
Sure.
And if any one of those guys go to Mitch McConnell and say, I can't support this unless you let the investigation go through, that's where then I think you start to see the White House make the calculus of maybe we should start over and pick somebody else.
Well, now is she actually saying, though, that she won't sit down with senators until the FBI investigates, which the FBI has already said, this isn't us. It's not for us to investigate here.
Well, and I think this is a perfect example of why people hate Washington, right?
Yeah.
Because every single time there looks, like there's going to be some sort of resolution, another roadblock gets put up. And so, you know, the Democrats were playing hardball about this. They said that her side of the story should be heard. Her attorney went on CNN and said that she was willing to publicly testify about her recollection of this. So what did the Senate Judiciary Committee do? They probably didn't want to be put in this position, but Chuck Grassley said, okay, come forward, let's do it. We're going to let you hear your side of it. Now all of a sudden they've changed and said they want an FBI investigation. Here's the thing. An FBI investigation is not going to resolve this situation before the midterms.
Right.
Republicans want this judge passed and in before the midterms. So you can see the cold political calculus of the Democratic Senate, and Chuck Schumer in particular, to why they would throw this out there saying that they should have an FBI investigation because it perfectly aligns with their political goals.
Sure. Yeah.
And this is what's so terrible about this. This poor woman, for whatever you think about her and her role in all of this, she's getting death threats now. She's been forced to move out of her house. They've hacked her email. She's caught up in the middle of this. And meanwhile, the future of the Supreme Court's being held hostage for what is really a short-term political fight. And you'd think that these two sides, if they're truly interested in coming to the truth, could come up with some sort of a resolution to this where everybody could have their voices heard, and then these members of the Senate would have the final say.
Well, and I got to tell you, you're going to have these guys that are interviewing this woman, and that is a perfect situation for Democrats because we tried to really discuss the issue this morning, and the issue of simply provability. Whatever happened to, well, listen, the allegation's out there, but it's impossible to prove or disprove.
Right.
Therefore, we can't do anything. Today, it doesn't seem to be that way. It's like, well, if there's an accusation against you, provable or not, you are publicly guilty. Maybe not in the eyes of the law, but you lose so much. So even having that discussion, I found it being uncomfortable because I'm like, boy, we're saying stuff that could get us in trouble. What do you think these old guys on the Senate are going to be? I mean, there's going to be somebody that's going to say something that's going to offend a whole lot of women in America.
Oh, especially given the culture and the movement that has taken place. You know, the way that we view these situations now is so differently than it was in 1991 when the Clarence Thomas Anita Hill thing happened. It's a much different situation. And here's the thing, and this is what I think we're wrestling with as a country. Like, most of these things happen in an environment that is impossible to prove.
Right.
It's generally two people in a room, and one person claims the other person did something that was harassment. And if you're not in that room, there isn't physical evidence that you can present that would change the course of the conversation. There isn't some sort of definitive way to show who's telling the truth.
Sure.
And the problem with that is, for years, that's just kept women from coming forward and saying anything because they knew there was no way to tell it. Now it's swung back the other way, where we are taking the claims of these women seriously, and in most cases, we are agreeing with them or believing them, and that's where we get ourselves into this situation. I think the big thing with Kavanaugh, the big difference now, and the reason that he may be able to hang on, different from all these other instances, is that so far this is the only accusation. And generally that's what leads to the kind of snowball rolling down the hill. I mean, Al Franken was a perfect example of that. This one accuser came forward. He said he doesn't recall that, but, that's not how he behaved. Then all of a sudden another woman. It became too much, and he was forced to resign. So far, this is the only person who's come forward. That's not to say somebody couldn't, but generally that's where you get that proof that there's some legitimacy to this
and
claim.
Another unique part of this case is actually the opposite. We had women coming out in support of Brett Kavanaugh, people that were in high school, that worked for him, college, at all levels of life, which I don't think was a common thread with the other one.
I get that you have that, but I think you did back then too. But the problem is with that is you're always going to find somebody who's going to be able to come forward in support of someone. It doesn't dissipate the charge that another woman is making. I don't think that tactic works, to be honest with you.
Well, I think if you look at, the Charlie Rose example is a good example. The Matt Lauer example is a good example. Here's the thing. A guy could be completely a normal human being, respectable and upstanding to every single person he comes across, but then at the same time behind a closed door is assaulting a woman.
Yeah.
And I think that's a definitive truth. So if you've not been in that room with him when this is happening, you really don't have any idea what he's really like once the door is closed.
That is exactly my point. That argument in defense of somebody, while I guess it will help your cause a little bit, says nothing about an accusation that another female is making. It just doesn't.
Right.
Okay, politically, this is a hornet's nest, but I also could be for both sides. The other part of this is, at what point do Democrats start acting responsibly in this situation? Because they're not. This is all political for them. And how do they walk away from this without this hurting them in the upcoming midterms?
It's a great point, Bill, and I think this is something that we haven't seen really talked about a lot. And you have to really look at the long-term political calculus of Democrats, right? This is the thing that everyone in the country needs to make sure they understand. There is no question that by January 1st of 2019, there will be a conservative member of the United States Supreme Court. Now, whether that's Brett Kavanaugh or somebody else, we don't know. But there's no way that the Democrats are going to stop the nomination process of a conservative judge. Because even if they lose the House or lose the Senate, Republicans lose the Senate in November, they're still in charge until the beginning of the year, and they can still push somebody through.
Right.
So here's the question I think Democrats are asking themselves. To me, it seems as though this is about inflicting the most political damage as possible leading up to the midterm elections, and then they'll just throw up their hands and say, whoever goes in gets in.
Yeah.
We've got control of the House and Senate going forward. Because the thing is, what the most likely scenario, if this stuff with Kavanaugh continues to happen, is that he's going to pull the Kavanaugh nomination and pick someone more conservative, like Amy Coney Barrett or somebody along those lines. So you have to really ask yourself the question, are the Democrats really concerned about Brett Kavanaugh being a Supreme Court justice or a conservative Supreme Court justice, or are they more concerned about just making sure they inflict the most possible political damage in this situation?
And this is, as you started, we'll bring it full circle, this is why people hate Washington. Because there's just, you can't believe anybody. Everything is political. Everything is about the fight, and nothing's about getting anything done. And
And
Pretty
there's
sad.
people's lives at stake here, right?
Yeah.
On both sides. You know, like this poor woman and everything that she's dealing with. You know, now Brett Kavanaugh, who's thought to have been an upstanding member of society, you know, kind of one of the, you know, the high achievers in America. Now all of a sudden his reputation has been destroyed. So, you know, and you know, how many of these senators in Washington really care about the real human impact of this? And I mean that Republican and Democrat, or are they more concerned about winning political points? I mean, their actions on both sides don't seem to demonstrate that they do.
And are we holding people to such a high standard? I mean, if you think about in your own life, just pick a couple. All it takes is one moment in your own life. Go back how many years? You go back to when you were in high school. Is there something that you wouldn't want to be out there in public that you feel would hurt you if it was exposed? That's setting the and have we reached a point where our political figures and even on the Supreme Court, they have to be so squeaky clean that we're going back into their high school days? That's setting the standard pretty high.
Well, but you know, Bill, I see your point there, but I'm not necessarily sure that's such a bad thing. I mean, this is the most important court in the land.
It's not about attacking a woman. It's about the other things that they're talking about. Oh, he used to have booze parties and he'd get drunk and pass out. I mean, find me somebody that hasn't been in that scenario. Boy, you got to dig really deep.
No,
the sexual assault is serious.
Sexual assault is sexual assault. It disqualifies him. I totally agree.
But he drank when he was 17.
Yeah, we're taking it to the next level here, it seems.
Well, then what happens is, but see, what's happening in that case is that, you know, they're extending out the scope of this inquiry into his background.
Right.
So they're saying, well, because he went to keg parties, that means that he sexually assaulted women.
Yeah.
Those two things don't necessarily equate. There's plenty of people I know that went to keg parties that never sexually assaulted women. Now, I'm not to say that it didn't happen.
Right.
But those things are not a direct correlation. So I think you're right in that respect. But, I mean, I do think that this is the most important job, one of the most important jobs in our country, and I do think a rigorous vetting of these candidates is necessary.
Yep. No doubt.
I just wonder if the people doing the vetting necessarily have the proper motivations and credentials to do this in an appropriate way. And I think that's one of the problems we're dealing with right now.
As always, we enjoy it, Ryan. Thanks so much. We'll do it again next week.
Thanks, man.
All right, guys, have a great one. Let me know about that maggot story. Keep me up.
Yeah, I'll get to the full details on that coming up. So, thank you. All right, got a break.